welcome to day 10. If you take a quick glance over the lessons for today, you'll see that there's nothing that you don't know how to do. You should know what's expected of you, but I'm still here just in case until you finally get into a really good routine of how this book goes. I'm still going to be doing videos for each day. So here we are still doing the present indicative. That term still doesn't matter, but as what is written here, it says today is a continuation of the verb lesson from yesterday. Well, what was in the last day's verb lesson? Well, we were still learning how to say things in the present tense, not future, not past tense, but present. And we were using the pronouns él, ella, usted, which you already know those. We don't need to translate them. That's him, her, and the formal way of saying you. And so let's continue reading this paragraph here. It says, you may want to do a brief review of that day's lesson before starting this one. We're still practicing the same verbal concept with the same pronouns él, ella, usted. However, today we'll practice with our 15 key irregular verbs. So everything is the same as yesterday's verb lesson. And the only difference today is that we're looking at the same thing but with our 15 key irregular verbs. So as you already know, these will just look a little bit different. You'll notice every time almost that there'll be like a couple of letters switched around that isn't normal, that doesn't follow the pattern, okay? So let's look at the example here. He is fine. Está bien. And technically you could say él está bien. That would be he is good, or he is fine, he is well. You could say ella está bien, or usted está bien. You are fine, you are good. If you're speaking very formally, showing more respect. As I've said before, a lot of times those pronouns will just get dropped. So you'll know who is being spoken about just based off of context. I know that is a weird concept, but it happens. This doesn't happen as much in English, but it is what it is. One example would be something like if you say, hey, so how's Zach doing? And then another person says, good. But who is good? You didn't say when you responded, who is good? Who is it? No, you didn't have to ask because you already knew we were talking about Zach. Someone asked, how is Zach? And the person said good. The person didn't say Zach is good. Also, they didn't use a pronoun. They didn't say he is good. No, they just said good or fine, doing okay, something like that, right? Because it's already established who we're talking about. So even in English, there are times where just in everyday English, we may not always use a pronoun or a sentence the way that would be, maybe taught in a school to someone learning English, right? So there you have it. That's just kind of an idea. So the example, again, this is just an example like yesterday's example. It's present tense, and it's talking about him, her, or you. And it could also talk about things as well, like the car, or the road. The road is wet. Yep, it's wet. It's wet, or how is that tree that you planted in your yard? And someone could say, it's fine. In other words, it is fine, right? It is not a he or a she or a you, right? Like we're looking at here, but it would still use the same conjugation because you could look at it as a he, right? In English, we would say it, but in Spanish, they would actually use she or her if they want to. They could do that. But like I said, you wouldn't talk about the tree and say he is good if you're just speaking fast in Spanish, like just kind of redundant. So they would just say está bien. But they would sometimes do it. Sometimes you will hear native Spanish speakers use a pronoun like he or she to refer to an object. But most of the time, the pronouns just get dropped. So how is that tree that you planted in your yard last year? Está bien. Está bien. It's fine. All right. So anyways, present tense. Here is our patterns to memorize. Remember, even though these aren't translated here in this table or this chart, you should already know these because these are the ones that could be used for he, her, or a formal you. So you could, let's take the first one, the he is, or whatever. Okay, it's está, right? So está means is in a temporary state. So you could make a sentence like this: he is bad. She is happy. You are sad. You are sad. You're sad, I can tell. So sentences like that, okay? So these are just examples that I'm throwing out there, but that's how you could use this. You could put he, she, or you before this word está. So the same thing with all of these here on the pattern to memorize. Before them, you could put, if you want to make a sentence like that, you could put he, she, or you in front of it. But again, they're not here. Why? Because they get dropped a lot when people are actually speaking Spanish like a native speaker, or when native speakers are speaking rather. All right, so if you have any questions about that, let me know. Remember, there's a building block method, so you should be using everything you know. This shouldn't be too hard. It is pushing you. I know it is pushing you, but it's not impossible. It's not impossible, because that's how immersion pushes you. Real life immersion pushes you to use what you already know. And that's how kids learn. Kids, remember how we talked about verbs, the little verb orientation in the very beginning, how there's the difference on the ending in English. It'd be like, I talk, she talks. There's not an S. Why don't I say I talks? Well, that's just the way English is. But a baby or a child that's learning English, you know, and they don't always have someone that goes, oh no, baby, you see, when it's when it's another person, you're talking about another person, singular, you would say he talks, she talks. But when you're talking about yourself, you'd say I talk. Like, I mean, yeah, some parents might explain that to their children, but most of us, when we learned English, we just learned from immersion. Our brains just kind of related that. So you're kind of getting a written immersion here by having to put it together. But I am telling you which ones you're doing. The only thing is it just doesn't have the translation in the table. So, all right, let's go to the next thing. We're going to our ing for today. So, you know, in English, where a word ends in ing, that we have it in Spanish. Look what's inside the bubble first. They don't change. It's all the same thing from last time. The ones inside the bubble never changed, only the word before. And what word are we putting here? Well, the bubble is pointing to it. It says está. Where do we get está from? That was from our last table, okay? So our examples there, I know we're kind of going backwards on this, but our examples there is she is talking, she is eating, she is living. That's just an example. If you take the word está and you put it before let's see, poniendo, which would be putting. Está poniendo, depending on who you're talking about, could be she's putting, he's putting, you are putting, so stuff like that. Okay, last thing here, vocab, you know what to do. I don't have too much to say. I guess one quick thing I could say is the word pasar means to pass, but it also means to happen and to go through. I've probably mentioned before that the words, the vocabulary that are taught in this book are in order of how common they are. We've tried to make a good order of how common they are, these words, in terms of what you're most likely to need to use. The word to pass is just used a lot more in Spanish. The reason I mention this is because you might look at it and go, well, why would the word, you know, to pass, why is that so early on in the teaching here? Well, they just use that word a lot in Spanish. So they would often use it instead of saying happen, like, hey, what happened? They'd say, ¿qué pasó? What passed? Stuff like that. And actually, that's a very common greeting. You've probably been taught that by some friends, or maybe even on the internet. You've learned that one of the ways to kind of say what's up, so to speak, is saying, ¿qué pasó? ¿Qué pasó? Literally means what happened or what passed. Okay, so all right, that's it for today. If you have any questions, let me know, and I will see you in the next day.